I'm Judd Myers.
I'm Scott Tipton.
Welcome to Blast Off.
Greetings and salutations, all. Your humble narrator and Blast Off co-host Scott Tipton here, welcoming you to another of our home shows. This week, in Comics 101, I'll be taking us back to the very beginnings of the Marvel Age of Comics with The Way It Began, exploring the origins of Stan Lee and Jack Kirby's Fantastic Four. Then, Harley Salbaka is back with another edition of Small Talk. And finally, in this week's ReTales, Judd Myers pulls back the curtain on his life as eyewitness. Let's get to it.
The history of comic books, the characters you love, and the people who created them. This is Scott Tipton's Comics 101.
Let us set the Wayback Machine for 1961, in which a successful comics publisher called Timely, or Atlas Comics, depending on what month it was and who you ask, was eking out a living by treading water and following the trends. If westerns were in vogue, it cranked out westerns by the bushel. If romance seemed to be moving well, then it was love stories all around. At the time, the trend was monster comics, so Timely turned out Godzilla knockoffs like you wouldn't believe. Timely's managing editor and art director was a fellow named Stanley Martin Lieber, although you might be more familiar with him by another name, Stan Lee. Lee had been working at the publisher since he was 17 years old and had risen up from the ranks of office boy. Although his monster comics were doing okay, Stan was bored, and about ready to leave comics for good. Meanwhile, Timely's publisher, Martin Goodman, was having a legendary golf game with national comics publisher Jack Leibowitz, during which Jack told Goodman what a big success he was having with their new Justice League of America comic. When Goodman left the links, he called Lee and told him to get to work on a superhero team comic book and do it fast. As Stan Lee tells it in Origins of Marvel Comics, he was also set on the right track by his wife Joan. She reminded him that since he was ready to quit comics anyway, why not do whatever he wanted with this new book instead of following the same comic book cliches he'd been repeating for years. Inspired, Lee began to flesh out his new concept for the book. First to go were secret identities. As Lee reasoned, if he himself had superpowers, he'd never be able to keep them a secret, so why should they? Next, out was the traditional classic superhero love triangle, in which our hero's girlfriend would really fall for him if only she knew who he really was. Instead, not only would she know who he really was, they'd both be on the team and treat each other as equals. Also, no costumes. Again, Lee couldn't see himself wearing tights and a cape, so neither would his new characters. Of course, this rule didn't last long. About 2 issues. Still, they kept to the spirit of the concept by wearing more utilitarian uniforms rather than gaudy costumes. Finally, this new team wouldn't always get along. They'd bicker, they'd squabble. Sometimes it would seem that certain members outright hated each other. Having decided the direction he wanted this new series to take, Lee typed up a synopsis for the premiere issue and handed it off to his ace in the hole, artist Jack Kirby. Kirby had just returned from a stint at National Comics and was currently keeping Timely afloat with his work on the monster comics. Over the next 9 years, the Lee-Kirby partnership would flourish and generate not only 102 consecutive issues of Fantastic Four, an amazing body of work, but also a sizable portion of what would become the Marvel Universe. Though their partnership would later wither, at the time, neither man had any idea that the comic book they'd created would launch a publishing and merchandising empire. In The Fantastic Four #1, in November of 1961, readers are introduced to genius scientist Reed Richards, his fiancée Susan Storm, Sue's kid brother Johnny, and test pilot Ben Grimm, Reed's friend and college roommate. In a bid to beat those dastardly communists to outer space, Reed and company hijacked the rocket that he designed, with plans to take it into orbit pronto, despite Ben's concerns about the rocket's insufficient shielding from cosmic radiation. You would think Reed, super genius Richards, might have listened to what seemed like a perfectly rational request for increased safety from a close friend and professional test pilot, right? Nope. After Sue questions Ben's manhood, he's totally on board. In retrospect, not one of Mr. Grimm's best decisions. The foursome sneak on board the rocket and launch, and are soon in Earth orbit. Almost immediately, the ship is hammered with cosmic radiation, with adverse effects on the crew, especially Ben, who manages to pilot the ship to a soft landing despite an almost unbearable heaviness in his limbs. Back on Earth, as the quartet begins to bicker over the failed flight, the effects of the radiation become clear. First, Sue fades away, then mysteriously reappears. Then Ben begins to grow and mutate, becoming an orange rock-like creature. Enraged, Ben lashes out at Reed, who, in attempting to defend himself, begins to stretch and distort, his limbs and torso freakishly elongating. Finally, emotionally upset at the conflict, Johnny suddenly bursts into flame, and then erupts into flight, soaring over the wreckage. The four resolve to serve mankind with their new abilities, some more begrudgingly than others, and dub themselves the Fantastic Four: Mr. Fantastic, the Invisible Girl, the Human Torch, and the Thing. So, was the book as revolutionary as Stan envisioned? Well, there was nothing else out there like it, that's for sure. Central to the book's uniqueness early on was the very palpable antagonism between Reed and the Thing. Unlike the others, whose powers don't preclude them from leading relatively normal lives, Ben Grimm is cursed by his powers, forced to live in hiding. He often takes out his frustrations on his own teammates, especially Reed, whom he quite rightly blames for his misfortune. To make matters worse, Ben from time to time reverts back to his human form, but never for any significant length of time, just long enough to get his hopes up for a normal life, before being dashed once more. The series' unprecedented emphasis on characterization and personal conflict struck a chord with readers, rocketing the Fantastic Four up the sales charts. In addition, the fan mail began to arrive in record numbers, giving Lee a pipeline to his readers he never had before, and helping to build a brand loyalty and character-first formula that would serve him on success after success at Marvel. The Fantastic Four's adventures were unique as well. Rather than falling into the standard answering a call for help type of storylines, the Fantastic Four were more of explorers and adventurers rather than crime fighters, often finding themselves in peril as a result of one of Reed's experiments. There was also a sense of realism about the series. The characters grow over time. Reed and Sue eventually marry and have children. The FF lives in Manhattan, not an imaginary Gotham City or metropolis, and they have real problems, be it angry neighbors or empty coffers. For example, when supposed genius Reed Richards puts all the organization's money in the stock market, which then goes belly up, the repo men show up to start hauling away the team's equipment. Stuff like that never happens to Batman. But best of all are the villains. Lee and Kirby hit a period of sustained creativity, with one outstanding concept following the next. They started strong in the premiere issue with the Mole Man, an unwanted soul who rules a subterranean kingdom miles below the surface. This allowed Kirby to bring some of his trademark monsters to the forefront. Also facing off against the FF are the alien shape-changers, the Skrulls, who impersonate and frame the team, and the Puppet Master, a twisted sculptor who uses his radioactive clay to craft miniature duplicates that allow him to control the minds of others, and whose blind stepdaughter, Alicia, becomes the sole joy in Ben Grimm's life. But none of Lee and Kirby's other FF creations measure up to what is arguably the single best comic book villain ever created, Dr. Doom. Unlike previous comic book villains who were just evil for evil's sake, Dr. Doom is as much a fully realized character as any of the heroes, with motivations you can sympathize with and faults you can identify with. Although Doom first appears in Fantastic Four number 5, which features a hilarious time travel adventure of Reed, Johnny, and Ben posing as pirates in the 17th century, the character's true defining moment comes in Fantastic Four Annual number 2 in 1964, in which we learn the fantastic origin of Dr. Doom. Victor Von Doom is born the child of gypsies in the Eastern European country of Latveria. His father, a gypsy healer who was marked for death by a local baron, dies trying to save Victor from the baron's wrath. After his father's death, Victor discovers that his late mother had been a sorceress, so he embraces the black arts, combining them with his own scientific genius to fleece riches from the upper-class aristocrats, then giving the money to the poor. Eventually, word of the unstoppable young gypsy genius spreads to the West, and Von Doom accepts a scientific scholarship to an American university in order to have access to the latest equipment and resources. At college, he meets fellow scholarship student Reed Richards and rebuffs Reed's friendly offer to room together. Obsessed with his work, Von Doom builds a massive device designed to breach the netherworld and allow him to contact the spirit of his mother. Wandering past Von Doom's room, Reed eyeballs his plans for the device and notices that some of the calculations are off by a few decimals. Reed tries to warn him, but Von Doom will have none of it and haughtily shows Reed the door. When Von Doom eventually throws a switch on his device, it explodes, disfiguring his face. Expelled, Von Doom leaves the university and wanders to Tibet, seeking forbidden secrets of black magic and sorcery. There, Von Doom was taken in by a mysterious order of monks who teach him ancient secrets and lore and help him create his infamous armored suit and mask, behind which he hides his disfigured face from the world. From there, Dr. Doom sets off to conquer, first seizing control of his home nation of Latveria, and then making plans for the rest of the world. Doom has real motivations and foibles. He wants to rule the world, but his reign over Latveria is shown as a benevolent dictatorship. His subjects are devoted to his rule, and in turn, Doom is devoted to their care. He wants to retrieve his mother's soul from torment, and he's bitterly jealous of Reed's genius, exemplified in the single moment when Reed is right and Doom is wrong, his scarred face now a perpetual reminder. Other than the Lee Kirby classics, most FF fans consider writer-artist John Byrne's lengthy run on Fantastic Four from 1980 to 1986 the next best thing to Stan and Jack. Byrne went back to the basics, placing heavy emphasis on the Fantastic Four as a family first and a superhero team second. Byrne also reinforced Reed's status as a near unparalleled scientific genius, stepping away from the Mr. Fantastic identity. Sue was also made a much stronger and more powerful character under Byrne's tenure. One noteworthy and heartbreaking Byrne story involves a desperate Reed Richards trying to convince Spider-Man villain Dr. Octopus to assist in the delivery of their second child, which is complicated by radiation poisoning. The art doesn't disappoint either. Byrne's clean, detailed style fit the Fantastic Four like a glove, and this period is some of his best work. Stan and Jack's Fantastic Four has found itself the target of adaptation on numerous occasions over the last 5 decades of television and film. In 1967, Hanna-Barbera produced Fantastic Four, a remarkably faithful adaptation of the Lee Kirby comics that aired for 3 years on ABC. The animation is pretty good by HB standards, the scripts are reasonably intelligent, and the voice acting is a little stodgy but effective. It's one of the better adventure cartoons of its day, and it boasts a finger-snapping, jazzy little theme song. It's a shame it's not available on DVD. In 1978, the new Fantastic Four, produced by DePatie Freleng, aired on NBC. Rights for the Human Torch were elsewhere, so he was replaced by the remarkably annoying Herbie the Robot. Despite Jack Kirby's presence on staff as a storyboard artist, this was a real stinker. Only 13 episodes were produced, and that's 13 too many if you ask me. In 1994, Fantastic Four aired as part of the syndicated Marvel Action Hour animated series. The series ran for 2 years, and the first year was not good at all, with bone-stupid scripts, terrible characterizations, and some of the worst attempts at comedy relief ever. When Galactus arrives on Earth to consume it, he's actually licking his lips as if he's sitting down for lunch at Arby's. It's bad.
On an outer space adventure, they got hit by cosmic rays, and the forward change forever. It's the most fantastic way. No need to fear, they're here. Just call apart. Fantastic Four. Don't need no more. That's ungrammatical. Adventures is elastic. Silk and made from side. Johnny is the human torch. The thing just loves to ride. All for more. Fantastic Four. Fantastic Four.
It was so bad, in fact, that the entire production team was replaced by all new creatives who acted as if the first season never took place. A good choice. The second season was as good as the first was bad, with superior animation, vastly improved acting, and suspenseful, intelligent scripts that featured plenty of action and guest stars galore. Everyone from the Avengers to the Hulk to Ghost Rider. And in 2006, following the Fantastic Four's successful feature film debut, Cartoon Network premiered Fantastic Four: World's Greatest Heroes, a French-produced animated series with a modern, slightly anime-styled feel. While the scripts were heavily comics-influenced and featured plenty of cameos from other Marvel characters, the series failed to catch on with young viewers and was never embraced by older fans. A shame, because as the series progressed through its 26 episodes, it steadily improved and is definitely worth checking out on home video. As much as the never-released 1994 Fantastic Four film has been pilloried by the fan press over the years, it may actually be the more faithful and better-acted adaptation of Lee and Kirby's most famous comic creations. In 1992, German producer Bernd Eckinger held the production rights to the property. The scuttlebutt in Hollywood was that Chris Columbus, fresh from the success of the Home Alone movies, wanted to make Fantastic Four his next project, and was waiting for the rights to lapse. So he wouldn't lose his option. Eichinger called in famed B-movie schlockmeister Roger Corman to produce the film. The movie was quickly filmed and in the can, only to never again see the light of day. The producers of Columbus's version bought up Corman's film, so his low-budget version couldn't be released before theirs. Eventually, Columbus lost interest in the project, and Corman's Fantastic Four was locked away to languish in limbo, where it remains to this very day. Directed by Oli Sassoon and written by Craig J. Nevius and Kevin Rock, Roger Corman's 1994 Fantastic Four is a surprisingly decent little piece of escapism. Not to say there aren't problems. There are problems by the bucket load. The dialogue has more than a few real groaners. The plot is needlessly padded out with a dull B-story and a secondary villain. And the special effects are occasionally low rent beyond belief. But there are more than a few things to like here too, not the least of which are the engaging performances by the four leads, who do their best to elevate the occasionally cheesy dialogue and chintzy-looking props with real emotion and heart, succeeding more often than not. The relationship between Reed and Sue is believable and kinda sweet, and Michael Bailey Smith's limited screen time as Ben Grimm goes a long way toward investing the Thing with his necessary humanity, allowing the puppeteers to do the rest. Even the score is very effective, conveying both the action-adventure daring-do and the nostalgic family feel the story needs. In 2005, the Fantastic Four finally received the big-budget, big-screen release it deserved, and it resulted in a film that deserved to be much, much better. Fantastic Four takes much of the simple charm of the characters and their origin, and needlessly mucks it up. The film was almost uniformly miscast, with the exception of Michael Chiklis' Ben Grimm and Chris Evans in his days before he was Captain America as Johnny Storm. Although the two of them have a playful energy, even the mighty Thing can only carry so much of a bad load. At least Fantastic Four creator Stan Lee gets in a good cameo as the team's ear-wiggling mailman, Willie Lumpkin. The 2007 sequel, Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer, doesn't necessarily improve upon the flaws of the first, but it has a modicum more charm. Whether this is because the film's now jokey, all-ages tone is less jarring, or because the CGI-generated Silver Surfer actually adds some dramatic weight to the picture, is for you to decide. It's not anywhere near the epic Fantastic Four movie the comic deserves, but at least it's short and not any more embarrassing than the first one. As for the execrable Josh Trask reboot of Fantastic Four from last summer, well, the less said the better. Let's hope that one of these days, the Fantastic Four gets back to where they belong in the hands of Marvel Studios, and maybe we can finally get a Fantastic Four film worthy of the works of Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. Fingers crossed.
Some of our best customers are some of our youngest. I'm Harley Solbaka, and this is Small Talk. So, of all the stuff that you, again, have watched and read, are there any choices or, like, stories that you didn't like that they told about the Star Wars universe?
I am not completely sure about that. I've never thought about it that way. Like, I don't disagree with a lot of stuff in Star Wars. I think it's really good, and I don't know if this is in Star Wars, but in some movies, some people think, why didn't he just do that or something? Why didn't they just think about it that way? And you realize you're thinking ahead of the characters.
Yeah, because a lot of time you can guess what's going to happen where the character is, like, living it, right?
Kind of.
And what about the prequels? Did you like all of those?
I did, because they kind of give you a backstory of what's happening now, but in, like, some of them, it was a little weird how they did, like, Obi-Wan's master. I don't think they needed to add that, because that didn't really give any connections.
Well, you should read the Anakin Obi-Wan story. They did, I think it was 4 or 5 issues. And that one was really cool because for me as a grown-up, some of the stuff in the prequels, I felt like they rushed some of the choices Anakin made. Mm-hmm. Right? He, like, went evil real fast, right?
Yeah.
It's not just me. All of a sudden, he was just like, I'm evil now, out of, like, 2 decisions.
Yeah.
In the comics, they actually, especially in Obi-Wan and Anakin, they talk about how Anakin was actually, like, questioning the Jedi Order and how Jedis work, like, when he was, like, 14 years old. So that made me feel better about the prequels.
Yeah, and I kind of think he just wanted to be a Jedi too quick, and the, like, dark side was doing more action and stuff like that. I know they did a lot of action in the Jedi, but I think he felt like it might have been a little bit more, like, more things to do and easier to become, like, a Jedi, but it's not a Jedi, it's a Sith Lord.
Yeah, he thought it was an easier solution.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually.
Thank you.
So I have a question for you because I always really loved Princess Leia.
Me too.
Why do you think Princess Leia is such an important character in the Star Wars universe?
Because without her, Luke would have never become a Jedi because he would have never met Obi-Wan because she delivered the message to R2.
That is an excellent point.
And I don't want anyone to hear this because it's kind of a spoiler.
That's okay. You can say it.
It's from the movie, so you have to watch the movies if you hear this. If they never met, Luke would have never found out she is his sister.
That's true. And what other things do you think she brings to the table? Like, she helped all the connections, so she helped it so that literally if she hadn't made certain decisions, then Luke wouldn't have been a Jedi. But what do you think she has, like, her character traits that add to everything they do?
That she's still a princess, but she feels like she doesn't need to be bossed around. Like, she gives a little more character than most princesses and other stuff. Same with Padme.
That's very true. They are definitely a lot more...
Alert. That's what I heard.
They're a lot more alert and
Yeah.
well developed than most princesses, I think, that we
Yeah.
read about or see stories about or anything like that. I always thought it was cool that she's basically the one in charge the whole time too.
Yeah.
She's like the tactical officer. She's like making all the military decisions.
And she saved Han from the carbonite.
She did. And yeah, I feel like doesn't she saves everybody at some point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, she was always my favorite because I think she taught me that just because you're a princess doesn't mean you have to stay in a tower in a pretty dress.
And this is way far back in the story, but I just wasn't thinking about it. When you asked my favorite character, I was also going to say Rey. Rey's awesome.
Why do you like Rey so much?
Because they actually, because they never do this in like Star Wars movies and stuff, except with Han Solo. I mean, actually, they never take like a big background character from a whole different planet, kind of like Tatooine, and they just take a scavenger and make her a Force user.
Do you think that because in the movie, all of a sudden she realizes that she like has really strong powers. She really has a huge connection to the Force. Mm-hmm. Do you think that she experienced that earlier in her life?
I don't know if she experienced that, but maybe experiencing all that like pain when she had to be left behind made her stronger. Something
That's
like
true.
that.
That's true. That's a good point, yeah, because I think in a lot of storytelling we find out that characters who go through a lot are stronger characters.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember I think you're the first kid I ever saw dressed up as Rey.
Thank you.
You made a great Rey. It made me really happy.
Thank you.
So Star Wars has been out.
And now I have a tiny BB-8.
Stuffed animal.
Moves its head.
Wait, you're
A
stuffed
stuffed
animal?
animal, you can move the head.
Oh, you can move the head.
And we have the little Sphero BB-8 that you can drive around.
Yeah, I still need to get
That
me
one's
one of
fun.
those. So Star Wars has been around for 40 years this year.
Yeah.
That's a long time.
Its next anniversary is this April.
So why do you think Star Wars is still so popular 40 years later?
Because they keep putting movies and surprising you with different stories and different adding things, and then like they surprise you every movie, and everyone is like, this is really cool because it's not like anything else you see with like people traveling and like things that can use something called the Force with like these sabers made of light that can slice through things. It's just really cool.
And so Star Wars is this crazy cool universe, right? Is there
Yeah.
anything in the Star Wars universe that really inspires you?
Maybe some of the creatures they have, like Nexus and stuff. Some of them can be really scary, but they're really interesting.
And
A
what
lot
does
of the stuff are interesting, like the alien races and things.
and what does that inspire you to do? Seeing all these cool different creatures from other planets.
And inspires me to like you can make basically anything, maybe like crazy wild creatures that are just popped out of someone's mind. And these whole stories, just someone just thought of them, and they're amazing.
I agree, they're amazing. So what is it that you love the most about Star Wars? One thing. What's the one thing you can think about it for a
I
second?
gotta think about it a little bit. So
I know it's hard.
just whole universe is full of different types, like a dark side and a light side, but they kind of draw off the same power of just like the things around you, a lot of stuff like that, and colors represent like other stuff, and there can be all different kinds of just things in the whole Star Wars universe. And like Kylo Ren has his saber, but it's a broken kyber crystal, which makes it shoot in 3 different ends, which is a
That's
different.
why it shoots in 3 different ends, because it's broken?
Because I think the kyber crystal is cracked. That's why.
Well, I didn't even know that. Where did you find that out?
I think my dad told me. I'm not sure, but
Were you?
I'm not
Were you
sure
not
how he
supposed to
figured it
say
out. It's not a big.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't know how I figured it out. Though.
I will
Might
say,
have been my dad, but I
you
don't
are
know.
so knowledgeable. Like, you give me a run for my money, and I've been in love with Star Wars since I was, your age. So you're talking about how colors represent different things in the Star Wars universe.
Yeah, except there's one, like, there's basically colors represent different sides. Red and blue represent like the majors in the Force that clash and fight. But if you see, there's some lightsabers that are purple and there's some lightsabers that are green, and it's kind of cool.
Another question. So when you read other comic books and other stories, when you're reading stuff, do you see that colors represent different things a lot when you read books and stories?
Yeah, sometimes.
I love symbolism, especially with colors.
Except for in like this other book I'm reading, there's basically it's Moon Girl Devil Dinosaur. The dinosaur is like red, but it's still a good character.
Yeah, but at first in the Moon Girl Devil Dinosaur, you're not sure if the dinosaur is good, right?
Yeah, but
At first you're not sure.
he actually acts like a dog, kind of.
I know he does. So what is it that you like a lot about reading comic books?
Is that in some comic books you can find out new things, and say there's a show and they have comic books about it, and in the comic books they're basically episodes that aren't actually on TV because they draw them and they write the words in some of them and they write the name. They're basically like episodes on paper of shows or something.
Actually, that's really good. It's funny that you say that because sometimes when I'm in the shop and people come in who haven't read comics, that's kind of how I explain comics to them.
Oh, that's cool.
Is I go, they're like, oh, well, what's the difference between issues? And then, you know, the collections. And they go, I'm like, well, it's like each issue is like an episode of a TV show. Collection's like a season. So yeah, it is like kind of reading an episode of a TV show because you have pictures and words.
Yeah.
Which makes it so much more exciting, doesn't it? Adding the whole other element of art to it.
Yeah.
I think that's all the questions that I have for you, but I heard rumors that you have questions for me.
Yes, I do. I have a few.
Okay, I'm ready.
There's one I'm going to ask that's like, what is your favorite Star Wars animal?
Oh,
Because there's a lot of different creatures.
I'm so blanking on his name, but when I was a kid, I really liked, you know, in Jabba the Hutt's palace,
Yeah.
the little weird monkey thing.
Salacious Crumb.
Yeah, Salacious Crumb. That's why I was like, I'm
Okay.
blanking on his name. He was my favorite when I was a kid, and I really wanted a stuffed animal of him.
We
Now-
do have a tiny stuffed animal of him.
I need to get myself one because when I was a kid, I thought he was so funny. He was my favorite little Star Wars creature because I thought he'd make a great pet.
What's your favorite character?
My favorite Star Wars character? Princess Leia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I was expecting.
I feel like, yeah, you probably knew that one already. That
Yeah,
was
because
the
it
easy
sounded
one.
like you already said it.
You can ask me anything. Doesn't have to be Star Wars.
I like talking about Star Wars.
I know, me too.
Just think about Star Wars, so. Okay, I can't think of any more.
You can't think of any more? That's okay. Well, thank you so much, Tilly. I really appreciate you coming on the show. It was
Welcome.
amazing having you because you literally, I think you know more about Star Wars than I do.
And I came here wearing my Sabine shirt.
Yes. And she's wearing a Sabine shirt, by the way, and I'm wearing a Princess Leia shirt.
This is Join the Rebellion. It's cool.
All right. So say bye, Tilly, and
Bye.
bye. Thanks for listening to the show.
May the Force be with you.
Dun, dun, dun.
Not all great stories happen in the pages of a comic book. Some of them happen in the store. Welcome to Judd Meyer's ReTales.
Year 1. His walking stick preceded him. It was the size of a small tree. He didn't seem to really use it, but it made him look regal, majestic. His red-haired queen followed closely behind, keeping her place. She was in her early 40s, he in his late. Both were well-groomed and dressed in immaculate fashion. When someone makes an entrance like that in a small retail store, you immediately know you're in for a wild ride. Tom knew how to make such entrances, and during his era at the shop, wild was indeed an appropriate description. "Good evening, sir," he bellowed. "And a good evening to you," I replied. He studied the four walls. It was our first year in business, so I was still filling out the shelves and putting the puzzle pieces together. He looked me straight in the eyes and announced, "I heard whispers about a new store on the boulevard, so I had to come and see for myself. Looks like you've made a very nice start so far. With a few adjustments here and there, this place could achieve greatness." Bewildered, I looked over at his wife. Sheila stood quietly by the door. She looked up briefly and turned her eyes away. We chatted for a good long while, getting to know one another. Tom told me about his history with the other retailers in the area. He'd been shopping at another store close by, but found himself disenchanted with the services there. While he spoke of his passions for Batman and Thor, he quietly piled one item after another onto the checkout counter. Sheila still looked at the ground, making herself small. She wore a bit too much makeup, applied an excessive amount of hairspray, and adorned herself with flashy jewelry. But beneath the facade lived a naturally attractive woman. The two of them made quite a pair. I rang up Tom for $300 in product and looked forward to learning more about this strangely fascinating couple. I would come to find that some knowledge is not always welcome, and some of the darkest comes not single spies, but in battalions. Tom and Sheila began visiting me once, often twice a week, because they were what we refer to as big-ticket customers. I gave them my undivided attention and made sure Tom got everything he asked for. He spent extravagantly that year. Tom wasn't content with any one thing. He wanted multiples. Only those would satiate his hunger. Of course, I was only too happy to oblige and ordered everything he desired. And ordered. And ordered. And ordered. His deep-rooted obsession with the Dark Knight dominated his buying habits. Statues, action figures, graphic novels, memorabilia. If Batman was involved, he bought it. Twice. Our monthly order meetings were dominated by the constant mention of Tom's name. How many of these statues should we get? 3 for Tom, I'd reply, before even thinking about our other customers. Does Tom want the entire set of these figures? 4 sets, I'd reply, to start. Tom and I spent many hours in the store talking about our personal lives. He'd been quite a well-respected and highly paid doctor for many years. He'd met Sheila when she was very young. She was an administrative assistant back in their hometown. He'd swept her off her feet and taken her to the big city. She no longer had to work and became a doctor's wife. An idyllic story for a successful man. Until he came down with an illness. One that none of his colleagues could diagnose. He showed me photos of himself taken only a year before, emaciated in one photo, enormously heavy in another. To go from 100 to 300 pounds, then back to normal weight in a matter of months was a frightening transformation. The pain was excruciating, Tom told me. If not for Sheila, I certainly wouldn't have survived the experience. Sheila smiled sheepishly, blushing at the acknowledgement. She nursed me back to health, Tom continued. She fed me, bathed me, made sure I took all of my medications, even when I refused. For the first time since they'd been visiting the shop, Sheila became animated. She lifted her head and fixed her eyes on Tom. Her gaze was dark and pained. No one forced you to take your meds, Thomas, she growled. You took them the way you take everything in your life, by the handful. With that, she graciously excused herself and walked out. Tom watched her go, mouth agape. He cleared his throat and quietly confided, It's been hard on her the last few years. I almost died and left her on her own. To this day, I still fight the tremendous pain. Without the medication, I wouldn't even be able to leave the apartment. It occurred to me that I'd often seen him taking medication in my store. He'd usually put a pill into his mouth as he entered, and sometimes he'd turn away mid-conversation to administer his dose. As usual, I helped him out to his car with his many boxes. Sheila sat in the passenger seat, quietly fuming. As I headed back inside, she rolled down her window and grabbed my hand. I apologize for the outburst, she said. It was wrong of me to do that in your store, and it won't happen again. Nothing to apologize for, I cheerfully replied. We are all humans with strong emotions. We don't just leave them at home when we go out into the world, do we? Sheila's eyes filled with tears. She let go of my hand and rolled up her window. In the driver's seat, Tom stared ahead, stoic. I left them there in the parking lot, dreadfully sure there was more of this to come. Year 2. Tom and Sheila began to change. She became more vocal about what he'd purchased, and his irritation with her grew. "Do you really need 2 of those?" Sheila would say. He'd reply, "Do you ever not get the things you want?" She'd roll her eyes and scoff, holding her tongue in public. Eventually, as is usually the case with these types of scenarios, they would stand at my register and hear the words I've often spoken in my time in retail. "I'm afraid your card's been declined." They would whisper to one another, shrug it off, and hand me a different piece of plastic that would work. Or not. Their outward appearance also changed. He took to wearing the same exact clothing every time I'd see him. Not dirty, by any means, just exactly the same. Sheila's outfits had become far less regal and far more casual. The jewels had been shed. Their communal visits were becoming unbearably tense, so Tom did what he needed to do in order to make himself happy. He began coming alone. Late at night, he'd drift in, popping a pill and chewing it down quick. He'd pile up the counter with product and stay for hours on end. His sentences became long and drifting and made their way from one random topic to the next. It was difficult to keep my focus in the face of his condition. When he ran out of credit cards, he began to bring in his own rare collectibles to sell or consign. He had a marvelous collection, and he demanded I take it in trade. So the journey into year 3 of Tom's visits was littered with scatological conversation, an influx of rare product, and a dark foreboding of something altogether inevitable. Year 3. "I have to talk to you in private," Tom whispered. "You're the only one who'll understand." His eyes were wild, his hair askew. Small pieces of yellow pills were wedged into the crevices of his teeth. He looked behind him as if he were being stalked. "They're watching me," he said, desperate. "Who, Tom?" I asked. "Who's watching you?" "I don't know yet. They've been following me. I think they let out the air from my tires. All of my doctors don't believe me, but there's something in my blood, something trying to get out. I think maybe they put it in me to experiment and see what would happen, but I'm working on a cocktail of vitamins and minerals that's going to get it out of my body. They know I'm onto them, and they don't want me to reveal what they've done. If you knew what I knew about what's going on, you'd be as afraid as I am." I was afraid, all right. Here was a delusional man, chewing morphine on my shop floor and confiding in me as his only true friend in the world. There are limits to how far we can venture into the personal lives of our customers. Communicating about ourselves on the shop floor is one thing. Becoming intimately involved in someone's fractured fantasies and tenuous relationships is something of a taboo in retail. It's a slippery slope and rife with danger. I told him he needed to leave, to go home and get some rest. I ushered him out as calmly as I could, and I hoped he'd be okay. The very next night, Sheila came into the store. She wore torn sweatpants and an old t-shirt. Her face was devoid of makeup. Her eyes were red and swollen, and she looked utterly exhausted. "I'm so sorry for coming in like this," she said. "I know it's not right, but I have to talk to someone who knows him. I have to know if it's just me." I closed a few minutes early, locked the gate, got some tissues, and listened to a woman on the brink. A woman who'd been struggling for quite a while in silence. "He used to be such a strong man. Everyone respected him. We went to functions and ate at expensive restaurants. And then he got sick and everything changed. They couldn't figure out what was wrong with him. He was in so much pain, and the medications they gave him weren't helping, so they gave him more. And he started to take twice as much as he should have. I was his nurse for a whole year. We never left the house. Never. Do you have any idea what that does to a marriage? It would have been easy to be dismissive, to detach myself and say, hey, I'm just a comic book retailer. You should talk to someone else. Easy for others. Not so for me. He can't stop taking the pills, she continued. And the more he takes, the more delusional he gets. He thinks someone is following me and filming me in the shower. He shouts and rages and accuses me of being involved in some plot to kill him. He's up all night and barely sleeps at all now, and I just don't know what to do. Sheila told me what I already knew. They were in dire financial straits. She'd taken a job as an assistant at a bank for some extra cash. She said that it actually empowered her and reminded her that she had a life and a mind of her own. I'm going to leave him, she said, but I'm afraid of what he might do to himself. Just tell me this. Do you think he's insane? Slippery slope. I think he needs some help, I said. Just not necessarily from you. Maybe you could use some help as well. Just not necessarily from me. Sheila thanked me, apologized 100 times, and went back to her life of emotional distress. Her husband had become someone she no longer knew. What's more, he'd become someone to fear, someone to avoid, someone to escape from. Year 4. They're turning her against me, Tom cried. They've put cameras in the walls. I found the holes. They're looking at her when she gets out of the shower, and they know. They're making her divorce me. One of my customers passed by and brushed his shoulder. Do you know him? Tom whispered. Have you seen him before? I think I've seen him outside my house. Tom, I replied, that's one of my subscribers. He shopped with us for years. He's an accountant. Sheila left Tom that year. She got her own place and her own life. As part of their divorce agreement, she was to get half of his entire collection. They needed someone to appraise and purchase it as soon as possible. Of course, they came to me. So, we purchased Tom's collection. It was enormous and, of course, included 4 years of product we'd sold him. We gave them a fair price and wished them both well. Tom continued to stop in. Some days his eyes looked clearer than others. He still spoke of a medical conspiracy bent on destroying the world. His vitamin elixir was apparently a success. It now rolled back time and made people younger. He was working on it in the room he rented from a friend. He was experimenting on himself, and the results, to him, were dramatic. The last time I saw him, he told me he'd discovered the secret to how the real world works. He told me he could control other people's thoughts and make them do whatever he wanted them to do. He believed he was at the forefront of ushering in a new age of humanity. He believed his wife never understood how special he was. He believed he had finally become what he always knew himself to be, a superhero. He thanked me for believing in him. He thanked me for being his friend. Then he disappeared. Most of what I do as a retailer, besides selling product, is wrapped up in the personalities, histories, relationships, and idiosyncrasies of my customers. I spend very little of my time actively involved in your lives, but most of my time hearing about them. I see your highs and lows. I see your babies born and families grow. I see your jobs and loves, both won and lost. I see your lives grow and blossom over time, and I also see them unravel and can do nothing at all to stop it from happening. I stand behind my counter and wait for you. I wait for the door to open and your stories to step in with you. I am the watcher. I am the listener. But mostly, I am the witness to both the good in you and the bad. I see the things that you yourself cannot, and often, very often, I see it all and say nothing. The Blast Off podcast is produced by the Colonel, Jeff Fox, Scott Tipton, and me. Original music is composed and performed by Derek Anthony Gray. You can find more of his musical compositions on his website, derekanthonygray.com.
For more information about anything you've heard us talk about today, check us out online at blastoffcomics.com. We have an active Facebook presence, so check us out over there on Facebook. And you can reach us on Twitter at blastoffcomics or on Instagram.
Or you can come by our retail location in North Hollywood in the heart of the Arts District, 5118 Lankershim Boulevard in North Hollywood, just 2 blocks south of Magnolia. See you soon.